We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and seek the truth with FBI whistleblower and common sense extremist Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast. It's Friday. Congratulations, guys. You made it all the way through the Monday through Friday grind. The weekend is upon us. Congratulations. And thanks again for joining us on the American Radicals Podcast, coming to you live on rumble.com/amradpod and YouTube amradpod1. And also check us out over at Spotify, trying to grow that one, guys. I'd really appreciate it there. Even if you don't happen to use Spotify regularly, just subscribe so we can see if we can grow that one out there. All right. What are we going to talk about today? Today is all about the corruption. It'll be institutional corruption, individual corruption, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So we're going to do a little bit of a primer on civil asset forfeiture and the potential corruption that can surround that. Also, domestic terrorism labeling, because now the leftist media has caught wind of it and how it might be a problem for their side when it really is just a problem in general. Lobbyists had a record year in 2025 with the Trump administration part dwo's first year in the books. Ilhan Omar is under investigation, sort of. Katie Hobbs has now taken the mantle as the most corrupt governor who is running for re-election. That's a governor out of Arizona. And then a DUI bribery scheme was recently revealed in New Mexico. So we'll go into some of the details there, and a lot of corruption on the books. All right, let's get after it. I want to begin today with a primer, just filling you in on civil asset forfeiture. It sounds really nerdy, but it's actually extremely important, and it is ripe for abuse within local, state, and even federal government. So what got me kind of thinking about it was a piece I saw over at reason.com, and it's a synopsis of a John Stossel video. John Stossel, a longtime journalist, libertarian-leaning guy. I actually went to an episode of John Stossel's television show when he had it at Fox News. That was, as an aside, but my wife took me as a surprise. We had the last hurrah before we have kids type of trip. We went to New York and got to do a whole bunch of different stuff. And we spent a butt ton of money, and I was earning $16 an hour as a cop at the time. So my birthday was right around then. I said, hey, hon, let's just say the trip is part of my birthday gift for this year. And then birthday rolls around, she gives me a gift, and I was so mad. But then she said, don't worry, it was free. I opened the envelope up, and it was tickets to John Stossel's TV show at Fox News, which was free because it was just open to the public to come in and be part of the live studio audience. So it was pretty cool. We got to hang out with some King's College libertarian kids, and they gave us free pizza back in the day when at Real Steve Friend still ate things other than almonds to fuel my 13-mile runs every day. But this piece from reason.com is a synopsis of the video that John Stossel put out, and I'll make sure I put the link down in the show notes for today. And it talks about headline, Border Patrol seized her $40,000 without charging her with a crime. It's a restaurant owner, name is Mandrell Stewart, stopped by police in Virginia when driving. And this guy had $18,000. He was going to buy some restaurant equipment with it, but the police said he was probably a drug dealer and seized it, actually confiscated it, let him drive away, but he was without his money. The money alone gave the police, as they said, probable cause to believe that he was committing a crime. And there was another example in this video, in the synopsis from reason.com. A musician was stopped and was in possession of $53,000 that his band had raised for charity. And this was in Oklahoma. The cops told him he could go, but not with the cash. They were seizing it. He actually had a bunch of checks too, but they couldn't cash those, so they let him leave with the checks. So it kind of stood to reason that there was not probable cause that he was committing a crime. And these are just some of the examples of civil asset forfeiture. Now, what is it? It's a process that the government goes through in order to claim your property. They're saying there's probable cause to believe that you committed a crime, so you can be charged with it. But they actually kind of quasi charge your property with the crime, which presents a problem when it comes to due process. Because how does property defend itself? And on top of that, let's say you get arrested. There's probable cause that you committed a crime. You could be detained in jail, right? Or you might be able to bond yourself out. Property can't bond itself out, though. And on top of that, let's say you are committing a crime or you are accused of committing a crime, you get arrested for it. In our system of justice, due process, you're supposed to be presumed innocent until proven guilty. But if the government seizes all of the money in your bank account, they might be able to actually compel you to plead guilty. They'll deprive you of the resources you need to mount a defense. You can't pay an attorney if you don't have any money, and not many of them are working for free pro bono in the hope that you win your case. And if you do win your case, it could be years down the line. So it flips it on its head, the presumption of innocence. And then let's get to the corruption angle. Couple of things. One of the statistical accomplishments that exists in the FBI, the quota system, integrated program management, one of those accomplishments is actually civil asset forfeiture. Now, go with me on this because I don't think I'm stretching credulity too much here. An agent works a white collar case, winds up seizing a Bugatti. I mean, that's pretty valuable, right? It's a career case. He winds up getting an award, a financial award, an on the spot award. Hey, the boss says you did a great job. I'm going to give you $500 for doing the job you already make a salary for doing. That's not uncommon. On the spot awards, $500, $1,000, couple $1,000. It happens quite regularly. From an accounting perspective, the FBI seized a luxury vehicle. They're going to auction it off, pocket the money, and then kicked back a percentage to the agent. How is that not problematic when it comes to prosecuting a case? Agent, is the only reason you arrested my client and presumed he was guilty because you seized his asset because you wanted a slice of the pie there? Hmm, that would seem to be a problem. What about local areas? Local areas actually use civil asset forfeiture to fund large quantities of the material that a city or a county or even a particular department within a municipality would have. So, some adjoining pieces to civil asset forfeiture. This comes from the ex-girlfriend at the FBI, where they get kind of into the explanation, the pom-pom waving for why civil asset forfeiture is so mega Doppler awesome. And they say, well, we use it to punish the criminals. Yeah, but what if they haven't been convicted yet? They're not a criminal yet. They're just alleged, theoretically. They want to deter illegal activity. Is it illegal to drive with $53,000 in cash that you raised for charity? Because that individual in Oklahoma lost that. They want to disrupt criminal organizations. Well, I guess if you seize the money, it is a disruption to their cash flow. But what if the person or individual is not any part of a criminal syndicate and isn't doing anything illegal? And some examples that they try to give for the benign and innocent and magnanimous reasons that civil asset forfeiture is just great. Think of all the awesome stuff that we can fund with the money we seize theoretically from these bad guys. And they go to New York City, where they do quite a bit of civil asset forfeiture. Here are some examples of how New York spent the money: a jobs program, after school programming, a plaque for a cop who was killed in the line of duty, school resource officer salaries. Pause it there. So, school resource officer is basically like a police officer who works inside the school for the Board of Education. Well, if you have a job, theoretically, it's a salary position. It's got a sense of permanence for it. It's not a contract job like, we need you for a couple of weeks and then the job goes away. You're a school resource officer for the school. The school is supposed to be a going concern. It exists in perpetuity. Then your job should exist in perpetuity. But if you're funding that job, that salary, with assets that you have taken from evildoers or maybe just people that got pulled over with large sums of cash, that would then create a system in which you have to keep doing that in order to fund those positions. So now there's a perverse incentive system to go and get as much cash as we can. And, if we can jam that square peg into the round hole and say, we had probable cause to believe that that pile of cash, even though you were going to buy some equipment for your business, that could have been drug money. So we're just going to take it. And the argument that individuals can fight to get their resources back. Yeah, but I mean, take the example of $18,000. $18,000 that was seized on a traffic stop. That guy is going to have to hire a lawyer. He's going to have to work his way through the courts. You're talking potentially years. Billable hours add up. He's going to wind up spending more money on the attorney than actually the $18,000. So if that's the case, it's a sunk cost. You just have to leave it. It's not worth it. How is that fair? Now, what are the opportunities here that the federal government has to increase its coffers? So a couple more pieces before we move off of civil asset forfeiture, because if you go down this rabbit hole on the federal government side, they start routing you to different places where you can learn all about all the awesome stuff that they've seized, and they want to give themselves some helmet stickers and brag. But they actually do, in the end, sell these things off for pennies on the dollar. So a couple sites, and again, these will be in the show notes if you want to do your own digging. Here are some of the auction companies who the federal government works with. You'll see here, Apple Auctioneering Company, U.S. Marshals Auction going on. There's a public auction. There's a salvage dealer. But let's get into what you can get. Look, anybody in the market for a 2015 Ford F-150? Current bids at $19,000. What about a 2023 Bentley? $56,000. And you got 4 more days to bid on it. Well, how about another auction site? We're at the very end of January right now, guys. I mean, Valentine's Day is approaching. Want to buy some jewelry? No bids for some of these gold necklaces here if you want to get your significant other stuff. You can buy all this because the government is just auctioning it off for pennies on the dollar. Now, I'm presuming, I think, that these items were seized from people who are presumed innocent until proven guilty. If they were proven guilty, then I think it's a little bit different. But I think the entire system of civil asset forfeiture sets itself up for corruption and it sets itself up for injustice. Think about my friend Amy Nelson. Her husband Carl was charged with a crime because Amazon lobbied the federal government, the Department of Justice, to charge him with a crime that he didn't commit. And in order to induce him to plead guilty, even though he didn't commit the crime, the federal government seized their family's assets for years. And actually, the Nelson family had to make a deal with the Department of Justice in order to get like 85% of their own money back from the federal government, that they wouldn't bring any sort of civil lawsuit against the government. Because what are you going to do? Are you going to launch a $1 billion campaign when you don't have $1 billion against the largest law firm in the history of the world? That is our Department of Justice. All right, so that's a primer on civil asset forfeiture. I want to do a little bit of a dive into some national security stuff too before we get to some particular examples of corruption on individuals. So let's go to the New York Times, at one point a newspaper which suddenly, shockingly, has discovered that maybe the federal government has an overly broad definition of domestic terrorism. Headline: White House use of domestic terrorist doesn't match legal reality. Welcome aboard, New York Times. Where were you for the last 6 years, or probably longer, as we'll get into? So, from the New York Times, there is no formal charge of domestic terrorism, meaning that a person cannot be convicted of that specific crime. Now, there's 3 elements for domestic terrorism that you should be aware of, because there isn't actually a law like, you are guilty of being a domestic terrorist, ergo, you got to go to jail for that. No, it has to be a crime committed a crime of violence that is committed. So it has to be one, dangerous to human life. Two, it actually has to violate the law. And then it has to be appearing to try to intimidate a government or a group of people to bring about some political end. Those are the three legs in order for it to be considered domestic terrorism. Now, again, that is not a law. Those are just elements which then let the Department of Justice, once they have worked through the process of indicting someone, arresting them, and convicting them, they can then go to the judge and say, all right, we want to have a domestic terrorist enhancement. So they can send you to the pokey for a little bit longer. Now, the classification affects defendants during the sentencing only. But let's get into the terminology a little bit, how it does lend itself to the ability for corruption and politicization to find its way in there. So back to the FBI, which in its archives, its documents, you have this little document that says domestic terrorism, definitions, terminology, and methodology. And this is a recent document. It's actually between the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI. And they consistently come out with this document called a strategic intelligence assessment. And they lay out like, what are the different types of terrorism that are out there. A little bit of a history lesson. So September 11th happens, and that's when the national security mission falls at the feet, particularly of the FBI. Bob Mueller, the director, kind of reorients the FBI to become this intelligence gathering apparatus far more than it ever had been before. And the goal of national security goes away from, hey, we're a century on the wall. We live in a free society. There is inherent risk attached to that. If something goes boom, we will investigate it and we will bring the bad guy to justice. The perpetrator shall be held accountable because we have great investigatory techniques. Well, now we're going to do pre-crime after September 11th. No American could ever die at the hands of a terrorist again. And they were successful relatively at that because the actual terrorist threat from abroad was not that significant. I mean, we have a couple of oceans. Most of these terrorists were kind of bogged down overseas by our military, which was deployed to go and break things and hurt feelings and kill people. So there really wasn't a terrorist threat on the home front. But government is a self-licking ice cream cone. The bureaucracy has to exist. It has to continue to feed the beast, get more work for itself to justify its existence. So they pivoted and they evolved what it was to be a terrorist, and not just looking at international terrorists, the Al-Qaeda's overseas. And they said, okay, what about homegrown violent extremists, HVEs? Those are individuals who were recently immigrating to the United States, or maybe a first generation, who were inspired, allegedly, by the overseas foreign terrorist organizations. So come over here as a youth, and you're growing up, you become radicalized because you're on the internet and you're finding all out about Boko Haram, homegrown violent extremists. There weren't very many of them. And in fact, the FBI used its playbook to entrap a lot of people, the Liberty City Seven being the chief amongst them. Still the largest Al Qaeda arrest in the history of the FBI. 7 guys in southern Florida. None of them were actually affiliated with Al Qaeda. But they ran out of those. So they pivoted further and they came out with the domestic violent extremists. And then they pivoted away from that and they made it, well, it's racially motivated violent extremists, white supremacists. And then the militia violent extremists. So those are people who like to shoot guns. So let's see if we can get them to agree to sell us an illegal gun. And we can do high fives and backslaps and claim that we stopped a terrorist. And then 2016 rolls around, and that makes a lot of the political actors within our government, particularly the Department of Justice, very, very upset. Those red hats, it was like a bull chasing that red flag inside the arena. And they said, we need to come up with something new, which is the anti-government, anti-authority, violent extremist agave. And that person, according to the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, is someone with a perception of government negligence, overreach, or illegitimacy. So if you think that it was wrong for the government to open up the southern border, that was maybe negligent, you could be a agave. Do you think that it was an overreach to make you put a diaper on your face to fly? That could make you a domestic terrorist. Did you have questions about the election outcome in 2020? Ooh, legitimacy. again, squarely within the crosshairs. And now we've pivoted even further. The latest is the nihilistic violent extremist, which, if you saw The Big Lebowski, you know that nihilists don't believe in anything at all. So, an overly broad term, yet again, the next evolution. See how corruption could find its way into that. It's just very politically convenient for individuals who want to go after their political enemies, people that get into positions of power and prominence and find their way to insert themselves so they can reward their friends, punish their enemies like a good old communist. Okay, those are some more in-depth primers on some intellectual stuff, but let's talk about some specifics that are going on right now on the subject of corruption. So this is a left-leaning source, the American Enterprise Institute, AEI.org, but nonetheless, I think they have some interesting facts about lobbying, because last year, when you adjust for inflation, was the best year ever to be a lobbyist in America. When adjusted for inflation, 2025 lobbying spending was on par with the peak year, which was 2009, when Barack Obama had his first year in office. Oh, I thought he didn't have any sorts of malfeasance going on there. No corruption at all. The worst thing he did was wear a tan suit, or he's just like all the rest of them. Ballard Partners. Does that sound familiar to anybody? I think that's where the Attorney General worked before she became the Attorney General. I think that's where the Chief of Staff worked before she became the Chief of Staff. Ballard Partners, lobbying firm founded by Trump's former attorney, from which Trump hired his White House Chief of Staff and Attorney General, set a record $82 million in lobbying. Really does help having principles within the government. Then there's a couple of examples. Nippon Steel. Now, Trump said that he was not going to allow Nippon Steel to buy U.S. steel, but then Nippon hired Ballard, and then the president changed his mind. Now, did the lobbyist make a compelling case, or was there a little bit of quid pro quo, as is implied here by AEI.org? They don't get into it, but I think it's just important to know that those sorts of things go on all the time. And it's not unique to the Trump administration, but it was a record year. And another thing before we move off this, that's worth knowing, that is incredibly lucrative for these lobbyist firms, not just Ballard, but all of them, is tariffs, because Donald Trump has made tariffs such a big deal. And there are so many exceptions that can go on with a blanket tariff, what he says, like, oh, I'm going to 100% tariff on China. Yeah, but there's all these little carve outs. Well, not for this particular good. So because of that wiggle room in there, these lobbyists come in and try to convince executives within the administration, say, hey, can you just give us a little bit of a carve out on that one good? We need it for, it's a component to what we're producing here, or whatever it is, the justification. And it's worth it to a lot of these companies to enlist the help or retain lobbyist firms in order to make that case. And the tariff push has made it very, very lucrative for lobbyist firms. All right, now to some individuals. And let's go to Ilhan Omar, Congresswoman, Minnesota, who's married her brother at one point and now is married to her former campaign consultant, who is the subject of this piece, this investigation, or at least this report from Fox News. The headline reads, "Meet the longtime business partner of Ilhan Omar's husband as questions swirl over her skyrocketing net worth." All right, couple names. Let me throw at you so we make sure that we're staying in line here. You got Ilhan Omar, who we all know. Then you got her husband, Tim. And again, he was a consultant for her, and she took campaign funds and paid his consulting firm like $3 million. And then they got married. So she essentially paid herself. And then his buddy's name is William. So Ilhan, Tim, and William. Now, Tim and William, they're thick as thieves, best buddies. They've started multiple business ventures together. So in addition to the $3 million that Ilhan Omar kicked over to her husband and this guy when they had this partnership, this consulting partnership, let's see that there was a lawsuit against one of their ventures from a bunch of marijuana growers in South Dakota who they bilked out of like $3 million. They said, hey, we're going to bring you back huge proceeds. And then they realized that it wasn't happening and they sued. And to date, Tim and William have not paid all that money back, even though there's a court order I wonder if the congresswoman has any juice on that to stop that from happening. Then you have Tim and William. There were other allegations when they started a wine business in California, because that's what people who represent Minnesota do. They start wine ventures in California. And the company started in 2023. It was worth about $15,000, and then the next year it was worth $5 million. Could it be some access issues? Maybe. I mean, that's a pretty big jump. And then another venture they have, a venture capitalist venture. So they're political consultants, they're sommeliers, and now they're venture capitalists. I mean, this is Hunter Biden, right? This is what they do. They started this other thing, and it was listed as being worth between $1,000 and $1,000 in 2023, and the next year was worth $25 million. Access, it pays. And I said at the beginning, at the outset of the show, Ilhan Omar, she's being investigated now by Congress, not the FBI. I mean, because that actually might end in a prosecution, but we know that'll never happen. Do you think that the House of Representatives is going to investigate Ilhan Omar and then make a referral over to Pam Bondi, who's too busy making sure that her buddies at Ballard are getting paid? No, it's not. In fact, we know it's not, because there was a great example of that last year when you had Corey Mills, Congressman Florida. There was a censure vote, and they were going to try to run him out because he had some stolen valor issues, some domestic violence issues, some really weird connections to the CIA and then the FBI. And then Stacey Plaskett from the other side, the congresswoman from the Virgin Islands, the non-voting member, she was communicating with Jeffrey Epstein. So the Democrats and the Republicans just said, tit for tat, we'll just toss them both out. That's the same Mike Johnson run House of Representatives that's investigating Ilhan Omar right now. So rest assured that you will be blown away, but all the nothing that will happen. But we'll get some articles from Fox News, maybe some Sean Hannity clips, and a tweet or three, and a fundraising email from the likes of the Mike Johnsons in the House. Okay, now let's talk about Katie Hobbs. Katie Hobbs has just kind of flown under the radar after there was some weird, again, shenanigans that happened within the election in the midterms of 2022. There was all this voting machine problems, and Arizona is a hotbed of it. And it was 2020 and then 2022. I think 2024, that the turnout was big enough that it didn't become an issue, but we'll see how things play out in 2026. And that state's weird to begin with. I've been there a couple of times in the last few years for various events, and it is the most purple state imaginable. I was there in 2024. Presidential election is honing in, and all I saw driving around on the highways were signs that said Republicans for Kamala Harris and other signs that said Democrats for Donald Trump. I mean, just down the middle. Katie Hobbs, though, has a corruption issue, or issues, as we'll get to. So I've got multiple pieces. What actually got me on this subject was looking at a Daily Caller article, but they were kind of very sparse with the details. And I went and found all these different reports. Now, she's been the governor for 4 years. Let's go into what actually has transpired during that time, has been revealed by multiple sources within Arizona. Katie Hobbs. Republican lawmaker asks Mays to investigate Hobbs' use of inaugural funds. Mays is the attorney general for the state of Arizona. Now, according to this report, which comes from KJZZ, it's a radio station, 91.5, Phoenix, Democrat Governor Katie Hobbs used a state website to raise funds for 2 separate inaugural events. So she gets elected, she's going to have an inauguration, and she is soliciting people to donate so that she can have her inauguration event. That is not a government-related thing, though. That's a political thing. She can't use a .gov website in order to do that, and yet she did. She winds up creating sort of this slush fund, as it's described. And one of the big donors on it was a company called Sunshine Residential Homes. And it is a company that has contracts almost exclusively with the state of Arizona, and they wound up giving $100,000 through this government website to the inauguration for Katie Hobbs. Now, was there any sort of quid and quo that went along with that? Because this Sunshine Realtors, they provide housing for kids who they can't find a guardian for, and they can't find a foster care for. So they're state-run facilities. And 99.9% of the income for the Sunshine Realtor Company comes from the government. So they have an interest in who the governor is, and it gets exposed here. So from AZ Central, and more on this Sunshine Company. Headline: This Arizona group home donated $400,000 to Katie Hobbs, Democrats, and got more state money. So it went beyond just the 100 that was originally reported in that radio website. What actually transpired? The Arizona Department of Child Safety, over the course of the past year, approved what amounts to a 60% increase in the rate that the Sunshine Residential Homes Inc. charged. They went from being able to charge like $170 a day to house a kid to $234 a day. So a significant bump in the amount of money that they brought in. Now, donations they made two $100,000 donations that were to this inauguration fund. And then after that, another $200,000 were donated to Hobbs' reelection. So $400,000 in return for the governor kicking back some really sweet enhancements to the ability that they're going to be able to charge in order to house kids. So exploiting kids, corruption, and this stuff goes on all the time. Was it a one-off, though, from Katie Hobbs? Not really. So there was a Medicaid problem that happened in Arizona. This one comes from AZ Free News, Arizona Free News, azfreenews.com. Headline reads: Arizona senators press officials on Medicaid fraud oversight failures. Institutional corruption not necessarily falling at the feet of the governor, but maybe there was. So it was discovered that there was $2 billion in fraudulent billing that was happening at sober living homes because people were going in there and signing the drug addicts and the alcoholics who were in recovery up for things that they didn't need, and then billing to get Medicaid reimbursements, which we all funded. Now, on top of the institutional corruption, we'll go back to Katie Hobbs because she didn't correct that problem, which was underneath her governorship. And this is specific to her rewarding her friends. Headline from ArizonaMirror.com. Arizona Office of Tourism Director resigns amid conflict of interest allegations. So 2 years ago, the state of Arizona spent $700,000 for a new state logo. That seems kind of expensive, kind of pricey. A logo? You can't ask Grok to draw you a logo? $700,000. Now, one of the major recipients, because there were multiple recipients, apparently, when you have $700,000, you got to spread that coinage around. Now, one of the benefactors of it was the brother of the woman who was the Office of Tourism Director for the state of Arizona. So kicks them over to one of your principal's brothers. Just very buttoned up here. It doesn't end there. Let's go to Arizona Free Enterprise Club. And this talks about the governor's expansion of her office staff and how much money she spent on this. The headline reads: Katie Hobbs has turned the governor's office into a jobs program for her political friends. It is discovered that just over a year into taking over as the governor, she expanded her office by 40 people. That's a 40% increase. She also gave everybody on average a $10,000 bump in pay. Altogether, it increased the employment cost for the governor by 50%. And then the last one, this is along the lines of actually creating jobs for your friends, not just giving them bumps. This comes from ArizonaCapitalTimes.com. Headline: Hobbs appointee gets new $170,000 contract amid layoffs because they're in a little bit of a financial crunch in Arizona. Katie Hobbs wound up finding her friend Dana Almond a new job, which she said was her senior executive consultant, and paid her $170,000 and gave her an assistant. And the assistant made $114,000. And that's been in place now for 2 years, which means that the state of Arizona, the taxpayers there, have shelled out $600,000 for positions that never existed prior to Katie Hobbs' tenure there. Just pillaging the treasury. And that's what corrupt politicians do. That's especially what communists do. All right. I got a couple more stories we want to get to here as we're approaching the end of the AMRAD pod, approaching the end of the week. Corruption. Now let's go out to California. Institutional corruption that exists there. This comes from creditandcollectionnews.com. Headline reads, California took in millions for 94,000 dead people's phone and internet services. So the FCC, the Federal Communications Commissions, they have an inspector general. They investigated and found that actually it was 116,000 people who were dead and yet received federal subsidies, meaning that their next of kin or their friends, whoever had control of their books, was pocketing the money. And California was the most substantial. So 94,000 out of the 116,000 were formerly residing in California. They don't live there anymore. They've moved on to the next life. It wound up being a cost of just under $4 million. To who, though? Because these are $9 to $10 subsidy payments for low-income people. It's a company, an organization called Lifeline. So about $10 they shell out to poor people so they can get telephone and internet services from you, the taxpayer. I mean, come on, Steve. It's just $10 a month. Doesn't say it. Doesn't say it in that pesky, dusty old document, does it? That the government exists to promote the general welfare and give assistance when it comes to broadband internet? No, that must be in the Good and Plenty Clause in invisible ink on the back of the Declaration of Independence. This stuff happens because there's no oversight, because success is in just continuing it and getting more people on it, and then also because the government is engaging in something that is not part of its charge, which makes it open to corruption, because you create more government and you bring in more people who are capable of becoming corrupted once they get a hold of power. All right. Last one we want to get to, and we will close the loop and go back to reason on our conversation today about some corruption. And this comes out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Headline reads, cop-assisted extortion of DWI arrestees in New Mexico included getting them drunk. This is wild. I sent this one to Garrett O'Boyle, my former co-host, colleague, compadre, now chasing down illegal aliens. And he was pretty disgusted. Garrett's always sending me corrupt police stuff, and I got him on this one. So the individual here is that was, I guess, spearheading the entire thing, was an attorney. His name was Thomas Clear. He bribed police officers to make drunk driving cases against his clients disappear. He just said, like, hey, you pop my client for DUI, or it's called DWI in New Mexico. So how about you just don't show up to court, and then the court has to dismiss the cases? Well, I mean, once you take that first bribe, you are corrupted, because that's what cops who wind up on the hook for years on end, that's the harsh lesson that they learn. Integrity is only a problem when you have it. Once you compromise your integrity that one time, it isn't just one time, because now there's derogatory material out there. Hey, you better take this bribe next time, otherwise I'm going to tell the authorities that you took it the first time. That's why you can never, ever bend the knee to it. But it actually got worse than this, because this defense attorney wound up getting his assistant to take people out who he would befriend and get them drunk, and then put them in a car, and then the assistant would call the police and say, hey, you want to go arrest that guy? And then the bribery scheme would continue. So the attorney and his assistant were drumming up business and bribing police officers in order to do it. Everybody within a position of power, within the sphere of influence of the judicial system, and they all just couldn't resist. Integrity, only a problem if you got it. So it's a harsh lesson to learn. It's a harsh topic to actually dig into to such extent today. But I think that's the general takeaway is that man is fallible. No matter what, this will always be part of it. It's not restricted to one particular political party or a certain level of government. Anytime there's power at play, anytime there's an opportunity to get in on the grift, people by and large are going to find it incredibly hard to resist it. So I think the best thing we can do as far as guardrails go, limit people's access, limit people's ability to have expansive power and pigeonhole them into something very small. And the way to do that is to shrink the overall footprint that the government has. The government isn't doing that much stuff, then they don't have quite the ability to engage in corruption. And in addition to that, make sure that we are not allowing people to remain in government that long. Because once they learn the ins and outs, they know how to hack the system. They know where that security system is. There's a blind spot in that camera there. I could do something else that I'm not really supposed to be doing there. Doing stuff ourselves. Just not having the government involved in all these missions is really the ultimate answer I think that we have. All right. So that is going to do it for today and for the week of the American Radicals podcast. But I will not leave you without a palate cleanse today. And this is a vehicle that I think would get pulled over for potential DWI, regardless of how I was driving. So let's have fun on this one.
Blanket weather on the couch.
Absolutely. Got to get cozy, huh?
Gotta get cozy.
It's cold when you're going 30 miles an hour on a couch.
Oh, yeah, I believe it.
Have a good one.
You too, man.
Driving a living room set. They actually had a license plate on the back. So that was fun. And they were leaving a liquor store. All right, guys. Enjoyed it as always. Had a great week. Hope to see you back here Monday. If you haven't already, give us a nice thumbs up, like, subscribe on rumble.com/amradpod, YouTube, amradpod1. And everybody head on over to Spotify, try to build that up as well. I hope you have a great weekend, and we'll be back with you Monday, 12 o'clock. Until then, have a great day.
You've been listening to the American Radicals podcast. Find us on YouTube, Rumble, and X at AmRadPod.